Well, thank you to all the candidates who have applied. Thank you for applying for this most important advisory board. Each of you has a very impressive resume, and which we have read. I'm going to ask the first question, just so you know the format of today. I'm going to ask the first question, and then each council member will ask one as well. We're asking each applicant to take no more than 2 minutes to answer each question. I will let you know when you are going over the 2 minutes. I'm doing this. Now, at one point, somebody thought I was getting the peace sign. I'm not. But this is the sign that shows that you're at 2 minutes. And I am going to rotate the order of who's answering the questions. There's only 3 of you for this interview board. So each one of you, by rotation, will get to answer a question, a first question 3 times, and then the second question 3 times, and whatever. So not everybody gets to answer, has to answer the question first. So my first question that I'm asking is briefly describe why you want to become a member of the Policing Advisory Commission, and given your background and experience, what do you hope to accomplish as a member? And the first person to answer that question is Mr. Ricks.
Thank you very much, Mr. Katz. I have been a member of the Chiefs Advisory Committee since back when Doug Duncan was in office. I served on the council in Tacoma Park, and when I was there in 72 to 82, I served on the Public Service Committee there on the council. I have been involved in going to Department of Justice seminars representing Montgomery County Police. I served on some community relations seminars during the Obama administration. I worked on a committee that studied the use of electronic weapons, tasers, and other electronic weapons. I have been, and that was for the Maryland Attorney General. So I've had a wealth of knowledge and information and background in working with the police departments, not only in Montgomery County, but I have been called by other jurisdictions for references on persons in Montgomery County who are looking for positions as chiefs. I feel very comfortable that I have knowledge of the issues that are out there today, and that I have the ability to work through those issues with individuals, with groups. I co-chaired the pay commission for the council. I co-chaired the organizational reform commission for the county back in 2010 when we were looking at $600 million.
Thank you very much, but you're at your 2 minutes. Thank you, Mr. Ricks. Thank you. Ms. Sandy.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. Well, I think the main reason why it was important for me to apply is because I've been a part of this community since I migrated here from Bolivia. I've had different types of experiences with police officers at school, outside of school. I've bear witness to many things that have happened in my community. There have been so many transitions, but I've also felt very responsible for having to do something about this. And I think this is the perfect gateway for someone like myself to be able to contribute in a way that brings different ideas, a perspective on tactics like de-escalation policies that can be implemented, and things like that. I've had to learn on on the ground, had to be a police liaison, had to run several roles at different direct actions as a union organizer, as a community organizer, but also as a member of my community. I've had to step in multiple times when street vendors are not particularly here in Montgomery County, but whether it was in DC, North Carolina, or Louisiana. And what I really want to do is bring the voice of young immigrants to the space, but also to uplift the voices that haven't been part of these conversations in a very long time. And that's really what I'm looking to do here.
Thank you very much. Mr. Sterling.
Thank you, President Katz and council members. I've been indignant about racial disparity in criminal justice since I was a public defender in the 1970s. In the 1990s, when I was with the Criminal Justice Policy Foundation as executive director, I started calling out the U.S. Department of Justice for the racial disparity in crack cocaine prosecutions that were going on. When I worked for the U.S. Congress in the 1980s, I had a front row seat to how structural racism gets built into the justice system as laws get passed without thinking through all of the consequences. I hope that our commission first there will not be any more police killings in Montgomery County. I hope that our commission will help Montgomery County be seen as an exception to the national critique around police violence. Our commission, working with the police, both the management and with the union, and with the county council and the county executive, to expand the legitimacy of the police as a government agency. I hope that all the communities in the county feel that they can trust the police, that they can go to the police to report crime, that when the police come to them, that they will be treated fairly, respectfully, and safely. I think the commission key issues that we have to accomplish are the clarity and clarify our mission, figure out exactly who we're advising, whether it's the police or the county council. Have to figure out whether or not we're a vehicle to receive complaints from the public and how, if so, how to manage that. My experience in setting up...
Thank you. Here's your 2 minutes. Thank you very much. The next person to ask a question will be Vice President Pucker.
Thank you, Mr. President. Thanks to all of you for putting yourself forward at such an important time for this very important mission. We're really grateful for everything you've already done and all your service to come. Let me ask this question. Black Lives Matter is only the most recent social justice movement to really challenge Americans to live up to their ideals. How do you look at that movement, and how will it inform your work on the commission?
And thank you. And the first person to answer the question is Ms. Sandy.
Thank you, Councilmember Hooker, for that question. So Black Lives Matter actually plays a big role in my community organizing and activism. Part of the work that I do, not as an ally, but more of an accomplice, in the sense that we want to organize and work together to make sure that we are a supportive system to our Black siblings who are being targeted disproportionately by different entities and systems. So my direct experience with police brutality had to deal with a Black Lives Matter protest. After Alton Sterling was brutally murdered, we went out as a community organizer with youth at a peaceful protest, and my ex-partner and I were brutally arrested, spent time in prison. I'm very privileged to be able to share my story, but the phrase Black Lives Matter takes on a different meaning when it comes to people that are incarcerated. My experience wasn't touched by me being arrested itself. It was by me being in prison and talking to the people that are seeing the cells that are in the system. So Black Lives Matter, it's not a movement, is part of life. It's going to have to go on, and that's the way we're going to have to operate moving forward if our intention is to uplift the lives of those who've been lost to state-sanctioned murder. And so I think it is important for all of us to acknowledge that it's not just a phrase, it won't be a hashtag, but it's a value that we have to live by. And as I'm looking at this commission, not only bringing my immigrant voice, but uplifting the voices of those Black immigrants who are left in a very uncomfortable limbo, who are facing both kind of ends of the, both sharp ends of the stick in this sense.
Thanks.
Thank you. Mr. Sterling.
Thank you. I think the Black Lives Matter sign that's in front of my house has been there for about a year. It's the second one we've had. When I stood at Black Lives Matter vigil on Arlington Road in Bethesda with the Bethesda Quakers on Sunday afternoons holding Black Lives Matter signs. The Black Lives Matter is a critique. It is a movement, and it is certainly a critique, and it is a evolving critique of American society and our history. I hope that my work on the commission is informed by the fact that my job is not to be in the front as a privileged white male. I'm going to have to continue to confront, as I do this work, my privilege and the power that I've had as a lawyer for 40-some years. We have to be clear that it starts with the question of police and violence and who is targeted for that violence. It is that movement and the nation's long overdue response to that that is, one of the reasons we're having this commission be created, and why the council has been doing this excellent work around community policing and the racial equity and social justice legislation. This is our time to do a whole lot to change and to create reparations for what has been a racially discriminatory nation since the Constitution was adopted in 1789.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Ricks.
For black male, my life does matter, as well as the other black males and black community. So I have lived Black Lives Matter from way back. I was raised up in segregated Washington, D.C., went to segregated school, went in the Air Force and was refused to be admitted to places like the USO in certain cities. And so I know what a black life is like. I was the first elected municipal person in Montgomery County, Maryland. And so I had to work through my own thing, my own life. In corporate America, I was the first black male or first black at Xerox Corporation and the first male. I helped to write Xerox's affirmative action program in the 1970s. So when you talk about Black Lives Mattering, I know what a black life is like. As far as it is today, I was privileged to ask by the chief, Marcus Jones, to go with him up to the Gaithersburg rally and be there with him and to meet with some young men who he is trying to, and he and I were looking at a mentoring program for bringing these black men into meeting with the chief on a regular basis so that they can give their input as a young people on this Black Lives Matter. So I have been involved in the community. I know the community, and so that's where I am.
Thank you. The next council member to ask a question will be Council Member Auburn-Knox.
Thank you, Mr. Council President, and thank all of you again for willing to step up and willing to serve and all of the civic activity you've done to date and what you will do in the future. One of the important policies that my colleagues and I passed this past year was working to define the term community policing. And I want to thank Councilmember Navarro and Bryce for their co-leads and all of our support for that effort. And as we learned through that process, community policing means different things to different people. And so I would like to know how you define community policing and what it means to you.
Thank you. And the first person to answer the question will be Mr. Sterling.
Thank you, Councilmember Alvarez. Community policing, in its early form, was a innovation away from the response to calls for service, away from sort of the detached way in which the police had operated, to work to restore the legitimacy that police had lost back in the days of the Rodney King riots and earlier. I hired Nicholas Pastor, who was one of the innovators of community policing when he was the chief of police in New Haven in the early 1990s. Community policing is extremely important because it's about restoring the legitimacy of the police. It's about reducing fear, and it's successful in doing that. It is not a crime reduction strategy. That's not what it's designed to do. When in 1994 the big crime bill started pumping billions of dollars from the Department of Justice to the states, community policing became a bumper sticker. Every cop in America was behind community policing because there were federal dollars flowing in on the tide of community policing. So you have to distinguish between the cop's office in DOJ. What we ultimately need, I think, is a very different kind of strategy. That when there is a call, I'd like to see someone like a grandmother show up at the door, not somebody with a gun, who asks first, is everybody's needs being met here? Does the baby have diapers? Does mom have vitamins? Does grandpa get his medicine?
Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Ricks.
When I lived in a small community, growing up in Georgetown, as a kid, I knew who the officer was in my community. When I was on the council in Tacoma Park, I knew who the chief was. I knew who the 4 or 5 officers that we had. And we had a close community. I was one who put together I would do the parade, the 4th of July Day parades. And I would have, the police there. I would have all the people who around in the community, and that was a community situation. As the things grew more, Montgomery County became less of a suburban community and more of an urban community. We got away from somewhat of having that beat cop who, was there for everybody knew. So when you look at Montgomery County now, take for instance, you look at where Poolsville is, and that's in the 1st Policing District, that's a long ways away for an officer to get out there. So the community may not know that officer as well as other parts of the community may know. So we need to be in the community, and it's somewhat like when I remember back when Marcus Jones was a private, or he was on a task force. He was on the task force, a mentoring task force. And we were out in the community meeting and talking with the community.
Thank you. Ms. Sandy.
So I think community policing is I think it has evolved through time. I think there are different parts to it, right? I think part of it is to have folks who are part of the police force, who are part of the community. A police officer that knows that someone's coming home at 2 a.m., questioning this person would not even cross their mind because they know it's Jimmy going home on X Street, getting home at this time. But I think there's an education process as well for the community. The police is like a crisis response. I think when we're all in crisis, the first person we think of is that's where you want to go to. So it's having the knowledge for the community to know that there are other places where you can get support. That there are other systems that can come and do welfare checks and restructuring. I think that process would also help. But again, that's kind of like an education process that the community should undergo by the police. When it comes to the police itself and the way that they serve, they have to spend more time with us. I, with my own experience, used to go through incredible trauma just seeing a police officer. And I understand at that point, I was documented. I wasn't undocumented anymore. I didn't present the same level of threat, but the fear was still present. So it's having this understanding that they are part of our community, that they are parents, that they are siblings, that they are uncles, and having the idea that, no, they're not going to present themselves with this deadly weapon, because that is the first thing that goes through my head. When I'm thinking about a police officer responding to a particular crisis situation. And then also having a level of training to have de-escalation tactics, being able to understand how to respond to a mental health crisis, being able to understand that sometimes, I think about Robert White all the time when I'm doing this work. And Mr. White was in his own community and undergoing through what happened. There was an officer that knew exactly that that's the path he took every day, that that's what he did as a community member. That would have been a completely different conversation. And so I think when it comes to community policing, is the community has to know the police. I don't know most of the officers in my community.
Thank you. Next, the next question will be asked by Councilmember Friedson.
Thank you. I will echo all of the comments that have been made up to this point. This is such a testament throughout this exercise as we've been interviewing candidates of the talent in our community and your professional expertise, your life experience and perspective. It really is a testament to the type of a county that we have in Montgomery County. And it's really at a tough moment for all of us for a lot of reasons. I think has really reminded us how fortunate we are to live in this community, although we recognize that we have a lot of work to do together. So my question is, if you are selected to this committee, on this commission, after your term is up after 3 years, what would you consider success to look like for you individually, and what would you consider success to look like for the commission as a whole?
Thank you. And the first person to answer the question will be Mr. Ricks.
I would hope that we will have eliminated any police caused killings in Montgomery County. I mean, that's my lofty goal. I think that I would hope that we would have a great education system for educating the public on working with the police department in achieving the goal of police community relations, because it has to work on both sides of the fence. The community and the police have to be able to work together. I would also hope that I could sit back and relax after that, because I will have done a great job along with the other members, working with the other members of the commission to help to eliminate the problems that we're having now, working with young people, with the younger people also, and bringing Montgomery County to a point where we are now the community that people want to live in, but even greater a community for all of the people in Montgomery County. So I would hope, Councilman, that by living in District 1, Council District 1, that the people in all the other districts would feel the same amount of safety and community spirit that I feel here in my community.
Thank you. The next person to answer the question is Ms. Sandy.
I think in terms of success is leaving a set of policies that are set to hold people accountable, that have a lens where we haven't seen the police brutality cases. I know there are ways that people can file complaints, but that there is a process that's transparent. I think my biggest success would be that there are policies that hold people accountable and that the process is transparent. A success for myself, I think, is just being able to be part of something and bring the voices of the immigrant youth, bring the voices of the communities that, again, have been disenfranchised for a really long time. And as Mr. Sterling said, I think one of the important things is that Montgomery County sets an example for a lot of the counties in Maryland. And I've noticed that since I moved here as a child. I've always heard Montgomery County, you're so lucky to live there. And I've had several experiences that tell me I am very lucky to live here. But I'm also wanting to have this experience to say, yes, in fact, our county is great and it constantly works to be better, so that we can create a place that people can say, well, I know a place where it works. And let's go and figure out what they did in order to have our communities feel safe.
Thank you. And the next person to answer the question is Mr. Sterling.
Thank you, Councilmember Friedson. Well, I think Mr. Ricks is absolutely right about goal number one, eliminating police-caused killing and improving police-community relations. Ms. Sandy is absolutely right about leaving a set of policies and processes that are transparent. I think other kinds of concrete things would be if the chief and the FOP president found that their participation in this commission was meaningful and constructive, and they came and participated. It would be success if we got complete cooperation from the police department on access to data, and if they responded by making changes in hiring, promotion, management of the department. It'd be success when the community's fear of policing goes down and when respect for the police goes up. It'd be real success if the police do not feel threatened by Black Lives Matter and its critique of the justice system. My success would be earning the respect of my colleagues for having worked hard and for sort of supporting them, which has been my experience in other commissions like the Montgomery County AODAC that I was on for 10 years, where people then asked me to join the board of directors of the Tree of Hope Association, or my experience when we helped set up the controversial the Maryland Medical Cannabis Commission when I was appointed by Governor O'Malley. We had to start with this whole controversy, and I earned the respect of my colleagues for our work in actually developing regulations that could set up that industry. I hope that so my success would be that the commission succeeds, and my colleagues felt that I helped support them and the commission's work. I wasn't there driving my own agenda.
Thank you. The next question will be asked by Councilmember Glass.
Thank you, Mr. President, and I also want to extend my thanks to the three of you for putting your name forward and sharing your professional talents and your personal experiences with us through this process. Earlier this year, when Chief Marcus Jones was before the council during his confirmation hearing, I shared the following statistic with him, that since 2015, there have been hate crimes reported in Montgomery County involving sexual orientation or gender bias, with a frequency that's only increased over the last number of years, particularly against transgender women of color, many of whom have expressed their concerns to me about their interaction with the police department. So given these statistics, I'd like to know how your presence on the commission will help address concerns by the LGBTQ plus community, particularly trans color, interact with the police.
Thank you. There were some audio issues. Could everyone hear the question from the candidates? Yes, I see. Yes, okay, good.
Ms. Statistic that the council member gave.
49 hate crimes, 15.
Okay, good.
Thank you.
Ms. Sandy, you were the first person to answer the question, please.
Thank you, Councilmember Glass. I think that's an incredibly important question to ask at this moment when we are talking about Black Lives Matter, particularly Black trans lives are constantly at risk and are disproportionately targeted, not just by police, but by hate crimes all over the country. So as a person who presents as a cis hetero person, but in fact, I'm pan, I'm a queer person, it is part of my identity, being in spaces where, I'm still not out, such as some circles with my family, the public, feeling unsafe. So that feeling, I can't even imagine how it amplifies in a different position, just trying to live out your authentic self. So when it comes to having a strong voice for Black trans women, I think if we're not listening to Black trans women, then we're not doing our jobs. And a lot of the activism that I've been privileged to have access to, all of the learnings that I've had, a lot of it has come from Black trans women in the field. And I honor that in every space that I enter. So I think uplifting their work, uplifting the fact that they are a target constantly, and being able to have a process where we make sure that this statistic doesn't look the way that it does right now. I think that's what I would do.
Thank you. Mr. Sterling.
Well, as a cisgender heterosexual white male, I could see folks wondering about my ability to be supportive or properly receptive to concerns that people in the LGBTQ plus community might have. I spoke about this in worship. Quakers in the 17th century were a despised people. Their worship completely offended the norms. They broke the rules. They were imprisoned and tortured. And that was because we insisted upon being authentic and living our spiritual lives. And Sandy put Miss Sandy put her finger on it. It's living your authentic self. And I said in my ministry that Quakers are queer, that we were the queers of the 17th century, that we must understand that to be queer today is an insistence upon living authentically. And I recognize that with my trans intern, with my trans collaborators in the Harm Reduction Action Network in Maryland. If you meet people where they authentically are and honor that, that's I think the first step in hoping that your presence on the commission is acceptable. Regarding hate crimes, we have to take hate crimes seriously. I think we have to ask the question, what is the effective police role in this? Certainly they have to hear properly the complaints of the victims. They have to be trauma-informed when they listen. I don't know exactly how preventing or stopping hate crimes is, and prosecuting them is the thing that the cops can do.
Thank you. And the next person to answer the question is Mr. Ricks.
As a Christian and as chairman of the board of trustees of my church, I am bound by God's word to be inclusive of all people. I became aware of the problem of the LGBT community. About 2 years ago, I was in meetings with Chief Manger, and there was a killing of a LGBT transgender person up in the Gaithersburg area. And at that time, that was not the popular community for Lives Matter. But we made sure that when that meeting was over, that the police department knew that, for me at least, that we valued all lives, and that we would want them to get the same respect that everybody gets. Now, having written, helped to write Xerox's affirmative action program back early on, that community was not included in the affirmative action programs have. And so I have had to adjust my life of thinking and of being flexible to be inclusive of all people. And so that part would not be a problem to me to legislate or to work with that community, with the community, with all the people of the community, to ensure that we get equal opportunity across the board.
Thank you. The next council member to ask a question will be Council Member Jawando.
Mr. President, and thank you, Mr. Ricks and Miss Sandy and Mr. Sterling, for now putting yourself forward. It's been a really awesome interview process. We've had so many qualified people, and you all are certainly in that boat. And special shout out to Nadia, who used to work in my office. Really glad to see you here. And Mr. Ricks, who used to train me at the NAACP. I got to say that too. I've been asking the same question, and we've all been very disciplined. So I'm going to ask the same question that I've asked other panelists. Last month, this council, we passed a resolution that I drafted declaring racism a public health emergency. And we did so recognizing and building upon the great work of last year and Councilmember Navarro under the racial equity bill to help us analyze all the ways that racism is a public health emergency. And but to say that not only do Black and brown residents die from police violence at a higher rate than anyone else in the world, we also die in many other ways, whether it be disproportionality in healthcare and access, and on our roadways because of communities that have been disinvested in, and disproportionately are subject to harm in schools because of lack of quality teachers that believe in all students, and resources, and environmental degradation, more likely to have asthma. The list goes on. And all these things have been baked into the pie, and Mr. Sterling alluded, and several of you have alluded to this, because we are operating in a system that was founded on anti-Blackness and dehumanization of Black and brown skin in order to prop up our economic system. So we operate in that system that is inherently racist, and we must acknowledge that if we're going to fix it, right? Because you got to diagnose it before you can fix it. So my question to you is, obviously I'm not burying the lead here. In your view, is the police system, the system of policing in this country and in Montgomery County, being a part of this larger system, is it racist? And if so, in what ways and how? And what are your views on that? And if not, you can obviously please explain that as well.
Thank you. The first person to answer the question will be Mr. Sterling.
Councilmember Jawando, the really important question. This goes to the heart of the Black Lives Matter critique and the controversies that are engulfing our society right now. Policing is, it seems to me, by any fair analysis, racist historically and racist as carried out now, which is not to condemn the individuals as being racists, but operating in structures which unconsciously and consciously are designed to maintain white privilege and white power. Article 4, Section 2 of the Constitution says that fugitives from justice should be delivered up. And then the next sentence is escapees from service must be delivered up. Well, who were those escapees? Well, those are the slaves. The Constitution sets up that in Article 4 that the capturing of slaves is one of the federal responsibilities of law enforcement. This is not just the 3/5 person in representation. Slavery for punishment is authorized under the 13th Amendment. And after the 13th Amendment, routinely police rounded up blacks in order to imprison them or to convict them so that they could be contracted out. And throughout the South, corporations and cities were built on the backs of once enslaved people, now free, caught up in the criminal justice system for the purpose of exploiting their labor. The war on drugs, which dominates our justice system, now, in the 1870s is racist against the Chinese. The Harrison Narcotics Act in 1914 is passed based on the claim that cocainized Negroes are raping white women. The Marijuana Tax Act of 1937, it's all about maintaining white privilege ultimately in how it plays out.
Thank you very much. Mr. Ricks.
Well, thank you, Councilmember DeWando, for bringing that kind of legislation forward. It's always been there, but now it's time to raise it up and put it in the right frame of mind for the world. The answer is yes. I've been around since, I'll tell my age, 81. And so I have seen the glory of what your legislation is talking about. When you look at the police department in our community, in the black community, it was a good old boy network. Look how long it took us to get a black police chief in Montgomery County, Maryland. That was Clarence Edwards. And then we had Moose, and now we have Marcus Jones. So when you talk about the network or has it been racist, yes, it's been racist. I've seen the beatings. I've seen the marches. I would help to put together the holiday for Martin Luther King, and I worked with the Congressional Black Caucus on many committees and things. So yes, when you look at not only the police department, but America, as Mr. Jimmy Carter used to say, has been racist. And so right now, the focus has been on the police department, but the other members and parts of the government, departments of the government, have been just as bad. When you look at us in Montgomery County, blacks have not been as welcome as they quote that Montgomery County was such a liberal place to live.
Thank you very much. Thank you. The next person to answer the question will be Ms. Sandy.
Thank you for that question, Councilmember Joan. It's so great to see you. I think it is inherently racist. The system that was built on colonization and the kidnapping and the human trafficking and the monetizing of black bodies is inherently racist. You go back to the origins of people who set a force to catch folks that were seeking freedom. You go back to just like Mr. Sterling said, the 13th Amendment and what segregation did in Jim Crow. It's criminalizing survival acts of people of color in order to filter them through the prison system for free labor and now for private prisons. The sad part about that is that it has now evolved into something that is called the Department of Homeland Security when it comes to ICE and Border Patrol. And so using this idea of protecting and serving, where they say we're protecting, Department of Homeland Security, we're protecting our homeland, it's using this like patriotism and the idea that for some reason with this force we will be more free, when in fact this is the force that has kept us from being free. So being part of this commission seems kind of a step toward understanding the root cause and how to figure out how we have a community police, how we have a system that responds to crisis that's not that is in fact inherently racist, but that doesn't have inherently racist practices. And so what's been hard for me to to take in is the fact that capitalism, it always seems to get entangled in that. And like I said, the private prison system is what's benefiting the most out of the monetizing of the bodies now. And so with a system that's already racist, you have to work inside of it. There are multiple parts. I've done the community organizing in the ground. I continue to do that in every space that I'm a part of. But I think being able to be part of a commission that's addressing the issue at its core will be able to dismantle that inherently racist background that it comes from.
Thank you. The next council member to ask a question will be Council Member Navarro.
Thank you so much, Mr. President, and really appreciate seeing all three of you and your willingness to serve, hopefully, in this capacity, because the combination of experience, points of view, and obviously the contributions that you can make are just extraordinary. We're so fortunate here in the county. And so I wanted to talk a little bit about this issue of who we are in Montgomery County. Obviously, I do think that it's been extraordinary. What an alignment in terms of timing, that last year we did dedicate the entire year to work on racial equity and social justice. I felt very, very strongly that it needed to be a law. And that's why under my presidency, I made sure that we would take the time to do it right. But really important for us to pass that legislation. And who knew that now this would be so relevant. So having that, putting that aside and talking about all of the issues that are involved in disparities and inequities, et cetera. When you look at who we are in Montgomery County, right, we are the microcosm of the country and the world. When we look at our school system, there are like over 150 countries represented and so many languages. And so taking all of that into consideration, if you were to be appointed to this commission, what would be the top three things that you would immediately seek to take care of that would be able to address the complexity and then all of the different issues that affect all of our residents in Montgomery County?
Thank you. The first person to answer the question will be Mr. Ricks.
Thank you very much. I appreciate you having working with that with the equity issues. One of the first things that I think I would need to concentrate on is our young black males in the school system who are not meeting the development and the gap, or closing the gap in the school system. Because if we don't get these young people on board, then we have a lot of other issues that we have to work with. Housing is another issue for our young and especially our black families. They can't live on the street, and if they can't pay rent and all that, especially like with the epidemic. Did you put your hand up yet? No, okay. And then the other thing would be that we look at getting more black females on the police department, and more females in the top positions in the department. We got to levelize things. We got to put this thing level equity across the board for people in all departments. And so those are some of the things that I would like to continue to concentrate on, because I'm already working in different organizations and all to make these things happen.
Thank you. Ms. Sandy.
Thank you, Councilwoman Navarro. So amazing to see you as always. The primary thing is I know that Montgomery County has done a great job at detaching itself from ICE, at detaching itself from immigration. But I think we can do a little bit more in terms of detention, in terms of making sure that, in fact, there are no more raids, that, in fact, ICE is completely out of Montgomery County, that there are ways that we can partner with neighboring counties to let them know how successful it has been to get ICE out of the county, because there are other places that do have still 287G policies that are implemented, which are incredibly harmful and literally bring undocumented folks right into the prison system. I think that would be the number one thing. I recognize that there are a lot of recently arrived youth, and it's figuring out how we keep them safe. I know a lot of them are constantly targeted because people perceive that they're in gangs. This has been happening since I was in school. We used to be profiled by the school themselves. I think working with the school system, not putting police officers in the school system, but having the school system understand where these youth are coming from so that they no longer are a threat of being arrested because a teacher thinks that a student is doing a certain thing or that. So I think those are the first two things. And then lastly, which is really, really important, is having either a space, a relations board. I don't really know what the process would be, particularly for Black trans women in our county, to report hate crimes. Because it isn't safe to call the police. I've met plenty of trans women who said that's the last place I would go to. Even undocumented trans women who could possibly be able to get a pathway to citizenship through this process are afraid. So having a particular space where people feel safe to be able to tell their stories that is credible. I think those three things, immigration completely separate from our police department, having support, youth support, and trans women.
Thank you. And Mr. Sterling.
Thank you, Councilmember Navarro, for your leadership on all of this, and for this challenging question. I think the first thing that I would do is look at the commission's budget. Does this commission have a budget to do the job, to do the outreach? I would want to see the commission preparing its literature in multiple languages of those that are spoken in the county to make sure that non-English speakers are fully aware that this commission exists and that we need continual input. We need to have commission hearings in many communities in the county. We have to go to be heard. We can't simply think we're going to open up a door in Rockville and have people come to us. We need posters in schools, in supermarket bulletin boards, in multiple languages. Then we need to have adequate data that tells us what the police are doing and who they're doing it to. We have to thoroughly understand what cases are being thrown out by the state's attorney as defective. The police have enormous power in advising the state's attorney on whether or not to dismiss a case or what kind of a plea bargain to take or what sentence to take. What I saw in 2012 from the police department when they didn't respond substantively to the letter from the AODAC that's in my application material is they, in that time, simply didn't understand at all this is an issue. They didn't understand it at all. And now it's certainly time to begin to look and see what's different. We need to look at the different bureaus of the department. It's not simply patrol, but everything from major crimes, special investigations, the field division, all the different units. It's not, is there sufficient training and understanding of the diversity of our county and the needs that we all have?
Thank you. The next council member to ask a question will be Councilmember Rice.
Well, thank you very much to the three of you, and it's good to see you again. For Mr. Ricks and Miss Sandy and Mr. Sterling, it's a pleasure. It certainly is going to be a challenge for us in trying to make a decision because you all have had great answers and have great perspectives, and that really is something that is important, I think, to this commission. So let me get into this. We can't ignore the legitimate concerns and criticism that some of our students and other members in the school community have had about all forms of law enforcement and their presence in our schools. Now, we also have to understand that students who bring guns or knives to schools or those who bring large amounts of drugs into our schools can be arrested by police officers regardless of whether they're stationed at a school or not. But do you think that well-trained school resource officers that operate more like counselors and educators working with students to diffuse peer-to-peer and peer-to-teacher conflict and to help address issues such as drug and alcohol use should be in our high schools?
Thank you. The first person to answer the question will be Ms. Sandy.
Thank you for that question, Councilmember Rice. So I think the important part is what school resource officers are actually tasked to do in the schools right now. As they present themselves in a school, I particularly never felt safer when there was a cop in school. As an undocumented young person, as a person who knew that a lot of my friends were committing survival crimes in order to make ends meet for themselves and their siblings, it was incredibly terrifying to go to school. And actually, I was present in an emergency situation at Einstein High School when there was a gun that went off. It was years ago, 2009. I don't know if anybody remembers, but there was a ton of police that had to come. The fact of the matter is that there was a security officer who figured it all out. It was all safely done. The force of the police that day presented more of a trauma to a lot of the young people who were in the school. And I understand the safety, the risk of a gun in school being what it means. But then we have to talk about the deep education and the deep investment that we have to place in our students, because they're not bringing knives or guns or things like that for fun. There are really deeply rooted issues that are happening that I don't personally think a school resource officer is going to fix. I personally don't think they need to be in schools. There should be an investment in those particular services that have crisis response systems for the students in the school that don't present a fear to the student themselves. Because I will tell you, if they spoke to me, it would already be a barrier. So if we're already doing education, as I said, and community policing, then yeah, it would be easier to transition into that kind of role of a SRO, but we don't have that ingrained in our community right now. And so I think, yeah.
Thank you. Mr. Sterling.
Well, thank you, Councilmember Rice. I know that this question of the school resource officers was an issue in the community policing legislation, and the legislation didn't express the council's strong support for SROs. And I think that, Ms. Sandy's description of her experience is sort of an example of why the council, I think, was correct in the de-emphasis in its legislation. I think that the role that you define for the police is an idealized role, but it's extraordinary, and you want to ask, is this a role for which social workers and counselors operating with the school system are necessary? Is the goal to improve the respect for the police and legitimacy of the police? That's a valid and important thing to have happen, but is having a school resource officer stationed in the school the way to accomplish that? I'm not sure that's what the evidence shows. Is the role of the school school resource officer to be there in the event of some kind of a shooting, such as the situation that Ms. Sandy described, or some of the horrors we've seen in other parts of the country? Well, a school resource officer isn't adequate to necessarily do that. Maybe that officers in a position to gather intelligence about troubled kids in the school, but then that's a different kind of role, and then that gets back to the question of suspicion and surveillance, and who is the school resource officer really helping to serve? So I think on balance, you need to be able to respond to the schools. You need to have officers come to schools periodically and programmatically in a focused way, but not in the sense that they're here in which the students say, this is surveillance, and I'm the target. I think that the educational role and the role to support to demystify the police is an important one, but that's done programmatically, not, I think, best through SROs.
Thank you very much. And Mr. Ricks.
I have been through portions of the training for our resource officers. I support having resource officers. I have seen situations where there have been concerns in schools. In fact, I was in a meeting and I got a call from a member of the black community in one of our isolated communities that there was going to be an attack on the school the next morning. I got on the phone and talked to our officers, the the person, the chief sent the resource officer out there, got all the information. The next morning, it was all cleaned up, things were clear. So there is a role for the office. Now, and I think they can play a great role in the school. I have two grandkids in the public schools in Montgomery County, one at Blake and one going to Blake. And the one at Blake graduates. And so, having been a black male, I've had to talk with them. They understand how their behavior should be. They know how they're supposed to interact with the police officers. And so all resource officers that I have come in contact have good training and have been working with the kids in the school. So I've also I was at Davisburg High School with some kids that the police department, the resource officers had brought together, and they took the kids through a training of what it's like to get arrested, what they don't want to do, and those kinds of things.
Thank you. And the last question for this panel will be asked by Councilmember Reamer.
Thank you so much. I'm learning from you now. I really am. Your responses on these questions have been informative and helpful, and makes me just feel very optimistic about the success that this body is going to have. So thank you for stepping up. And Mr. Ricks, I know you've been on the Chiefs Advisory Board for a long time. Thank you for that. And Mr. Sterling, you're a national leader in criminal justice policy. So you exemplify Montgomery County's residential community in many different ways. As do you, Ms. Sandy. I love your responses and your knowledge of the council through your work with Mr. Tawanda. It's awesome. Is there anything else that you would like to add that you haven't had a chance to say? An issue you want to touch on? Something you would like to be sure to leave us with, as this is the last question.
Thank you. The first person to answer that question will be Mr. Sterling.
Well, thank you, Councilmember Reamer, and thank you, everyone, for the opportunity to speak to you. These have been excellent questions, and it's been an honor to be with Mr. Ricks and Ms. Sandy, and they're very articulate and informed analyses in their responses. We haven't talked about the union contract. I think most observers recognize that the union contract is a critical issue in how the police get managed. So that's something we're going to have to think about how we're going to dive into. The statute says the commission must meet at least 6 times a year. I don't think 6 times a year is at all adequate. I'm not sure meeting monthly would be adequate for the urgency and the scale of the task. I think the question of is the commission going to be staffed is an important one. How we cover the expenses of the commission in research and writing, in addressing the multiple language issues. I think that we need to anticipate that there will be complaints and setting up a system on managing the complaints and who reviews them. Our goal in many respects is to separate Montgomery County from the national stereotypes about policing and police culture. And we want to do that not only so that the community understands that, but that our police officers feel that. And so we need to know what the police think. We need to be able to sort of survey them and reach out to them. It's not just the community. We need to think about things like the role of informants, the question of promotion, beat assignments. We really need to be able to look at the way in which the department manages at the line level. What are the roles that the sergeants and lieutenants play? And finally, to think about the role with the prosecutors. So,
Thank you. Next is Mr. Ricks.
I too have some concerns about the union contract. If some of you may remember, several years ago that I was summoned because of my involvement with the union contract when we did the Organization Reform Commission. I came and testified before the council on effective bargaining. Nancy Maureen was the council president at that time. One of the things that we had the problem with then was under Mr. Leggett that the police chief could not make certain decisions as a chief, as the head of the police department. And so unless he took it to bargaining, and we had problems where he wanted to move people to Silver Spring if they were hot spots, or he wanted to do all these kinds of things, and the union would not allow it. I was the treasurer of an organization that was working with Mr. Leggett, and so after the union tried to get it through, it didn't go. And so then they took it to referendum. And the public, the citizens, the voters sided with us, and the union then took us to court. And I was one of those that they summoned in because I had been involved in getting that turned around. It finally got turned around. The chief got to have those things. So I understand the need for at the union, but there are certain things that, like with the Bill of Rights, the Police Bill of Rights, that we need to make sure that we can do certain things around that.
Thank you. And the last answer today will be from Ms. Sandy, please.
Well, thank you so much for having me here today, Mr. Sterling and Mr. Ricks. Your tremendous amount of knowledge has also blessed me with a lot of information today. So I think there are a couple of things. I'm a union organizer. I wholeheartedly believe in unions. That's part of my work. I come from a union family. But when it comes to police unions, there's a little bit more of a delicate conversation because the consequences are very different than what you will if you, I don't know, you have an unfair labor practice at a different place. And so I think there needs to be a very strong, very separate conversation about what that relationship looks like. I do think that there needs to be more conversation around what the state's attorney and the police department do together when it comes to charges, and then accountability. As a young person, as a millennial, I've grown up in the era of accountability. Everything's online. If you say you're going to do something, I have to see it. And so accountability for me is really important. I want to be able to form part of this group of this commission to be able to bring a voice that hasn't been heard there before. I identify a lot with Councilwoman Navarro. I've told her plenty times how beautiful it was to come to a county and as a young woman, as a young Latina, to be able to see that representation in the council. And then working with Councilmember Jawando and understanding that there are barriers that still need to be broken in certain spaces. I understand my privilege to even access this interview. So I want you to really think about the people that need to be in that commission. I'm not saying that I'm the right person. I'm saying that I want that opportunity to be able to bring the voices of the thousands of immigrant youth that have gone through the same fear I've gone through, that have lived the same experiences in a county that we call home, that we're not going to leave, but we're going to make it better.
Thank you very much. At the end of every interview that we've had, and it's been mentioned several times today as well, we have mentioned how difficult this council actually makes some difficult decisions. I don't know that any of them it would be nearly as difficult as the decision for this Police Advisory Commission, because candidly, each one of you has brought such a different viewpoint, and in so many ways, we've asked the questions, but you truly have given us the questions on what we need to be looking at and how we need to be doing it. So I thank you for making a difficult choice for us, and it will be. Our goal, and I'm underlining the word goal, is to have this commission appointed by the end of this month, before we go on break in August. So that is our goal. We hope to be able to do it. We're going to try our best to do it. You will hear from us. And if you are not selected, and we have no idea, I have no idea who is and who will not be selected, but if you are not selected, please, let me underline the word please, stay involved with Montgomery County. We need your help. So with that, please enjoy the rest of the day, and please have a safe and pleasant weekend. Thank you. Take care.
Thank you. Thanks all very, very much.
Take care, guys.
Bye-bye.
Thank you, everybody.
Approved $10,000 to serve as a pocket change, petty cash for startups.
For more information about villages